Sid, would you come up here, please? Read these quotes that you have submitted.
Thank you, gladly. It's been quite a few times John's been talking about things of people not holding the microphone close enough to their mouth. No, that's it. People not accepting an obvious truth. And this quote has been staring me in the face for a long time, so I wrote it down. From Leo Tolstoy. I know that most men, including those at ease with problems of the greatest complexity, can seldom accept even the simplest and most obvious truth, if it be such as would oblige them to admit the falsity of conclusions which they have delighted in explaining to colleagues, which they have proudly taught to others, and which they have woven thread by thread into the fabric of their lives. I thought that was pretty all right. Another completely different set of quotes, more on the lines of accepting something that's been given to you. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's, there are few. By Suzuki Roshi. The mind of the beginner is empty, free of all the habits of the expert, ready to accept, to doubt, and open to all the possibilities. Baker Roshi. It is not difficult to attain enlightenment, but it is difficult to keep a beginner's mind. Suzuki Roshi. That is all.
Thank you, Sid. The next few minutes, I would like you to once again go over some things with you, albeit secondhand. But nevertheless, what I'd like to have happen here is for Chris and Lewis to go through an experience that they have just had, that you may understand and understand clearly exactly what can be done with expanded consciousness.
About an hour before lunch, or a couple hours before lunch. An hour or so before lunch, a couple hours I guess, I looked over at Krista a couple of times, and she was having a pretty rough time in a healing crisis, and being that we're in the middle of a pretty intense lecture, it wasn't really the time to find out what was going on. And about an hour later, about 11 o'clock, she had to take off and went back to her room. And as we broke for lunch, I caught up with her and was asking her what was happening. And she, over the last couple of days, had been having a tremendous pain in her throat. And today it got excruciating, where it was very sharp. She's still having a hard time, so she doesn't want to talk right now too much. But nonetheless, it was quite painful, and just brought her to tears, and was really difficult to breathe and swallow and everything else. And the first thing I noticed when I was sitting there is she didn't have her wedding ring on, and as I was about to ask her why that was, she started to tell me what happened. And although I really sort of had an idea why that was, my grandmother died about a year ago, and when Chris and I got engaged, she gave me the ring that Chris has as a wedding ring to give to Chris. My grandmother died of cancer of the esophagus, and for all of her life that I've been around, and I would imagine most of it, if not all of it before that, she was an extremely angry and bitter person, and very hateful of just about anybody in her life. That included most of her family, although there was not very many of us in the family. She was very resentful of people being happy because she was very unhappy, and she did her best to make everyone else unhappy, and she was quite successful at that. My mom died when she was 52, when I was in my mid-20s, and being a kind of a crazy kid, I didn't really get a chance to know my mother as well as I would like to have. And this is my mother's mother I'm speaking of. And my grandfather died when I was in my early 30s, and I had a much better chance to get to know him, but still not as well as I would like to have. And so with my grandmother, I made the best effort I could to love her for who she was and accept her and appreciate her for all that she had done for my brother and I and my family, the rest of my family. And I feel like I did pretty well at that. When she passed away, I felt that I had kind of brought some sort of completion to that whole thing. But as I say, she is an extremely bitter person and angry and very hateful of just about everyone in her life. So as Chris and I were sitting there talking outside the dining room hall just before we were going to go in to eat, John came, or I said to Chris, we really need to talk to John because in the first week when we were talking about the energies that stones and clothes and that sort of thing could take on, the first few days or sometime during the first week, I wrote a question down on a piece of paper and I passed it up to John, asking if he could clear these rings that we had been given from my grandparents. And for some time over the last year, off and on, I've had quite a few dreams or thoughts of the ring, Chris's wedding ring, being stolen or taken, or her losing it, or just in one way or another her not having that ring. And I really didn't understand exactly why that was, but trying to apply body electronics, I made every effort to look at the word patterns and why I was thinking that and what that might be associated with, and I couldn't really understand exactly what that was. I never felt like it was because she was that we would not be together anymore, but I still couldn't understand what it was. I never really said anything to anyone about it. But as we were sitting outside the dining hall, I said to Chris, I said, we really need to catch John today and have him take a look at the ring and clear it. And at that point, John walked up and I asked if he would spend a few minutes with us after we ate, but before the lunch break was over, and he said, well, let's do that now. So we went back to our room, Chris and John and I, and John proceeded to take the ring, which Chris had not been wearing for a couple of hours, and he held it and he immediately began getting the same symptoms that Chris had. Started choking and coughing and pains in the throat, and among many other things, tremendous pain in the left temple, or just the forehead above the left eye. And my grandmother was blind in her left eye and had cataracts and had always had tremendous headaches throughout all of her life that I was aware of. She died of esophagus cancer, and for the last several months of her life she was totally unable to swallow. Even if she ate the smallest amount of food, weeks later it would still have been lodged in her throat. She would have to have it cleared out, and she was not able to swallow at all, even her own saliva. And John began re-experiencing all the things that my grandmother had experienced, including the word patterns and the pain in the throat and stomach and intestines and back, and virtually many of the pains, if not all of the things that my grandmother had gone through throughout the last 10 or 20 years of her life. I don't know exactly how long. But it was emotional for me because the word patterns and all that struck a very strong chord with me because I was quite close to my grandmother. And one of the underlying word pattern in all this was that I'll never forgive you for what you've done to me. And that was directed at my grandfather, which Chris and I were both very aware of because she just couldn't stand my grandfather, and she made his life extremely miserable. He did everything in his power to make her life as comfortable as he could, and they were fairly well off financially, so that was certainly not a concern. After my mom died, which was in the early 80s, my grandmother gave up doing everything that she would have otherwise done, cooking, and she had always been totally dependent on my grandfather anyway. She'd never learned how to drive a car, and so my grandfather was at her beck and call virtually 24 hours a day, and regardless of what he did or how much he applied himself, she was never satisfied. And this was apparent to everybody around her, and as I say, with John having the ring, all these word patterns and emotions were coming out, and it was I was having a bit of a difficult time because being tied in with her, it was really hard. And I was trying to make every effort to send her my unconditional love wherever she might be, and just trying to work it out for myself as much as I could while this was going on. And tremendous number of word patterns and emotions and things coming up that were all going through John, and he was just spot on with everything that he was saying and feeling, because as well as we knew her, this was exactly what had transpired. And I've never said one word to John or anyone about my grandmother. I mean, other than Chris and I, but we never spoke with Doug or John or Anita or anyone, for that matter, about any of this stuff. So although I had no doubts that he would be able to do this, it was still quite emotional and painful to see and experience this as it was happening. And after maybe a half an hour or so, John was just not able to clear the ring. He was able to get all of the negative energy out of it, but he was not able to clear the, I guess, the thought form, if that's the correct term.
Everything was cleared out, but the attachment to the ring.
That's, yeah. My grandmother, as John put it to us, was still completely attached to this ring, as well as everything else that was hers, and to the best of his efforts, he was not able to clear that attachment. He used decrees and obviously many other things, but it was just not. He was not able to clear her attachment to that ring. And although all of the thought forms and so forth or in negative energies were taken out of the ring, he still said, "If my opinion is that you should get rid of this ring, and you should sell it and buy a ring that can be yours, because this ring will never be yours." And again, this was just struck home very hard, because my grandmother would never let go of anything. Even if she gave you something, there was always an extreme attachment to that. And no matter what anyone did to try and express their gratitude, she could only receive that in a very small part, because in her mind that was hers, and it didn't matter if she gave it to someone, that was still hers. And she was that way about people and things and everything in her life. And which again is pretty difficult for me, because we received quite a few things from her, and it's difficult to look at it that way, and even to make as much of an effort as possible to love her for the way she is. A little bit along the lines of what John said earlier this morning, is sometimes love isn't enough, and there's still such a strong attachment. Her hatred and her anger is so strong still, even though she passed away. John looked up at me and said, "She's still here. She is not letting go of this ring, and she will not let go of this ring." And so, as I said, John recommended that we sell the ring and buy one that can be Chris's, because this ring, at least as of now, can never be her ring.
Well, I never really thought about getting sick from somebody else's ring, but I've definitely a couple times experienced some of the same symptoms that Lou's grandma had, and when I couldn't even swallow today, I was just kind of spitting into the sink, and I sort of felt like his grandma, and it kind of freaked me out. So I took the ring off, and within about 5 minutes it started easing up, and I started feeling a little bit better. So I guess for me, I think it's important that you take all these things seriously.
Let me explain now very gently what went on. Sometimes you have to clear yourself from the space of other people's gifts and things, because their energies are on it. And sometimes when you accept a gift with another person's energy on it, that energy is very difficult to clear because of their attachment to the gift. And this is why some of the advanced teachers will not accept gifts from people under any circumstances. They just will not accept gifts because they don't want to be encumbered with other people's energy. Clothing, items, jewels, anything like that. And this is what I want you folks to be painfully aware of, is as time progresses and as you progress in your ability to feel energies, you can simply take an object in your hand that belongs to somebody, and all of a sudden you feel what they're feeling physically, like any disease symptomology. You'll hear their voices in the word of thought forms. You'll feel their emotions, and their emotions just like we had in the room there. I think without them telling me anything about the grandmother, I was able to feel exactly what her word patterns are without any confirmation on the part of Louis and Chris until later. And I knew where the pains were because I was feeling them in my body, which were emanating from the ring that she had shortly before her death. Now, this gets down to the jewelry that you're wearing. The question is, where did it come from? This comes down to the clothes that you're wearing. Where did they come from? Who died in them? Who died, and then you inherit the old jewelry that you picked up at a bargain at a flea market? Whose house are you living in, and what are the energies in that house? Who lived there before you moved in? Now here's where you have to be able to learn to clear the house, to clear the clothing that you're wearing, to clear the jewelry that you're wearing, and even then acknowledge that if a spirit has not been recycled yet, and they're still around, even they can lay claim to the things that they had while they were living. And actually, you will still feel that person's energy, even though you can clear that of the energy patterns, you'll still feel the person's presence because they still lay claim to those things that you have in your possession. Nita, did you say something?
Well, I think I told my story before about the necklace that we had bought, and then this lady, that's right, the necklace I was wearing, and I went to this person's house, and the person was very, very ill, and she had a lot of negative word patterns, and she came up and touched it, and the minute I got home, the whole necklace exploded. And I put it together 3 times, and it just kept falling apart. And then finally, I had John hold all the beads, all the crystals. There was aquamarine little crystals on it, and he got out all the word patterns. And he transmuted it all, and then I took it to a jeweler to have it restrung again. And finally, it stayed together. But it was interesting because after I had told that story, the person's not here, so I guess I can say it. But I had some bracelets on that I've had these bracelets for years and years and years. And one of the persons, they wanted to touch them, and so I let them. I figured the people in here have pretty pure energy. And about an hour after that, the bracelet just broke. And so I find that other people's energies really affect my jewelry tremendously. And I noticed that when I buy something, if the energy of the person who had put it together is not good, I can also feel that. Because this necklace I bought, I remember I didn't even wear it, and I just got it home, and it just exploded on the floor and broke in a million pieces. And I had to clear this one too, and then I had it restrung. But I believe the person, when they're putting it together, the thoughts that they're having while they're putting it together can affect the jewelry. So even a new necklace I think it may be charged with the person's handicraft.
Chris, what else did you want to say? Anything at all? Lewis?
Anybody want to buy a ring?
It's a beautiful ring.
Got a good deal on it.
John, if that ring was melted down and another piece of jewellery made from it, would it still hold the grandmother's energy?
When you heat in the crucible and you take the gold that's there and you heat it up and you reform something new, usually that will not hold the same energy because in the heating process it destroys the energy that is there. In much the same way as if you go to a person who has died and they're on the funeral pyre and you burn them, you release them from the emotional body which holds them earthbound, and then the soul is free to go on. But if you bury them in the ground and the person is still tied to their emotional body, then they'll remain there, and this is why so many cemeteries are haunted. You go around a cemetery in the middle of the night, and you get all kinds of weird things that put the hair right up the back of your neck. And these are things that are very, very real, because here are earthbound souls that are still attached to the body that they had, and they hadn't gone through the refiner's fire, so to speak, that you would have in a funeral pyre, which releases them from the emotional body, which keeps them earthbound. Lewis? No, the stones are another matter. You got to clear the stones. But you can clear the metal. That's what one question was. Okay, Doug, anything you want to say there, sir? Okay, questions, comments? Gary?
If in the case of a ring or a bit of jewellery and you know that there's energy hanging onto it, what about your karmic responsibility if you're going to sell that and pass that on to somebody else who's totally unsuspecting, doesn't know about it?
The karmic responsibility here in this situation with the mother, the grandmother's not interested in people she doesn't know. She's only interested in the people that she's emotionally tied to. And if that ring were to be sold, it would not affect anybody that she was not tied into emotionally. Because where she's tied into emotionally is where all of her attention is bound. Now that is just one situation. Situations may change. But I want you all to understand is that a stone can have a curse put on it by the owner. By the tremendous emotionality of negativity that is there, where you wish that anyone who owned that stone, other than yourself, so to speak, would die. And a person owns that doggone stone, and all of a sudden they feel their health waning very quickly. And if they keep that particular stone in their possession, they will die. And I believe you're all aware of different stones that other people have owned that appeared to have some sort of a death curse placed upon them. Beautiful diamonds that were cut more beautiful than any other stones, yet they have these curses placed upon them by the original owner.
John, with this, with regard to the rings, Wolf and I are actually wearing mourning rings. They're Victorian mourning rings, when somebody died. I mean, we've been wearing them for, ages. I mean, ever since we got married.
Take the ring in your left hand. Here's the rule. I haven't told you this, but Chris and Lewis will understand. You take the ring in your left hand, which is the receptive ring. You hold it, you'll hold your left hand face up, you put the ring down in the bowl of the hand, and then you hold it there, and you hold it in any position you want really, but you hold it there until you're able to get in touch with the energies in that ring which now permeate your body as you are willing to be receptive. Now, as you increase and open your receptivity, you can feel the energies of thought, feeling, and spoken word which permeate your body, which emanate from that particular ring. Now, after you have done that sufficiently, as Lewis and Chris well pointed out, with all of the emotions, all of the pains, all of the thought forms and so on that are there, and after you have gotten contact with all of those, then you place them in the right hand, put the ring into the right hand, which is the hand which is given for the creative powers, and you have that in your hand and you hold it there. Don't run off. I'm not done yet. You hold that in your right hand until all of the energies are recreated and you feel nothing more upon the body. But best thing to do is to put the yin and yang together, hold it in your right hand and put your left hand over the top of it. And hold it there until all of the energies are transmuted. And then when they're all transmuted, what you'll feel is you'll see the violet flame surrounding it completely, and you'll get a vibration in your hand in that little object, which can be in a fruit or even in a vitamin pill or in an object, in a crystal. You get a little bit of a vibration there, and you hold that till the vibration is gone. Now, like today, there was a time when I couldn't get that vibration. And I looked and looked and looked at all the word patterns, thought patterns, and emotional patterns that were there. They're all gone. It was cleared. But then I became aware that the grandmother was still there, and she laid claim to the ring. Because she, as they later explained, as Lewis later explained, even though she gave something, it was always with strings. It was never given freely, except she still, in her mind, she still owned it. And the same thing is there with the ring, because the grandmother hasn't gone yet. Now, you take the spirits of these folks, and sometimes they're very hard to get in touch with, much less sending them to the light to where they go through the recycling period. And so sometimes you cannot get in contact with them because the grandmother might be dealing now with other relatives other than Chris, you, and Lewis. Do you follow what I'm saying? And so it's difficult to get in contact with the woman unless you want to call her up. And I don't want to do that because that puts you right into a trance-like state, like the Witch of Endor, who was a great priestess in the early days of the Old Testament. And they could call up Samuel or call up any other dead person that they wanted to. And of course, it would be very disruptive to Samuel or other people who have already passed on. And we don't necessarily want to start going into seances and this sort of thing, even though they can be very, very real. For every truth, now you have a counterfeit for truth, and I want you all to understand that. But there have been times and places where the dead have been brought back for specific purposes of getting information or for giving a chance for that person to free themselves from the earth plane. Now, you have a lot of this in Polynesia, where the Polynesians live literally with their ancestors. And they acknowledge their ancestors, and their ancestors are still very much there and will appear to the Polynesian people on a very regular basis to talk to them as I am talking to you. Now, is Rebecca here? Rebecca, is that correct? Hey? Would you like to come and add to it if I have misrepresented you in any way? Okay, while Rebecca's coming, is Rebecca coming, or was she sleeping? Hang on.
Yeah?
Just hang on a moment. I'd like to finish this one thought here completely.
Yeah.
Rebecca, did you hear what I was talking about?
I was actually in a very deep sleep,
Sleepy.
but I did hear what you were saying.
Okay, I gathered as much. Now, what we're talking about is how come up this way a bit so we don't get the feedback. We're talking about our dead ancestors. And we're talking about they are as close to us as right here and there. And that many of the Polynesians live very close to their dead ancestors and talk to them like I'm talking to you. Is that correct?
That's correct for me.
Pardon?
That's correct for me.
Okay. But are other people able to talk to their dead grandmother or their dead grandfather with just the endurance they had while here in the flesh?
Definitely.
Okay. Now, many people do not understand that, but the Polynesians do. And this is because their dead ancestors are a part of their everyday life. I've talked to a chief one time, and he said he doesn't do anything until he consults with his ancestors. And he goes up into a little spot where he has his little throne, so to speak, and he sits there and talks to his ancestors on a regular basis to help solve the problems for the whole family. And the ancestors come there and talk to them just like I'm talking to Rebecca, and they're just as real as could be. They come and they go. They fade in and they fade out.
It was their idea for me to be here, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Pardon me?
It was they asked me to come here, that's why I'm here.
They told you to come. Well, they told you to come.
Yes.
I'd like to meet with them sometime, because there's some things that I need to discuss with them. If they have that much, if they know what they're doing there, then you just give them my greetings, and we'll discuss it later. Okay? I want you to know I'm very, very close to the Polynesian people, and I'm very, very close to those who have passed on. And how many were in Auckland with me when we had the meetings of the group that came down from the north? And they knew things about me I have never told anybody. And I had to explain what was happening. And the thing was, that's when things came out in the open here a little bit that I didn't expect to have happen. But that was a little kind of quite a little experience, because this whole group came down from the northern part of the island to have a special little ceremony there for all of us there at the Body Electronics Seminar. That was very exciting. Okay.
You've answered the question, John, actually. I mean, you know, about the rings. I mean, we've got to clear them, or try to clear them. Yeah.
When you sit down, yes, when you sit down with these rings, and you sit down and start feeling it, you feel a deep sense of sadness there. Those rings. Now allow yourself to go through that particular era of sadness and loss, feelings that are there. And just sit down and just feel the rings. Put them right in the middle of your left hand. And there's a chakra system there right in the middle of the left hand. Put it right in your left hand, and then allow yourself to just choose to receive the energy unrestricted as it flows into your body. And once you can do that to a ring, you can do this with anything you want. People, things, dogs, cats. Okay? Are you with me on that? Okay, how do you know? How do you realize that this guy's name was Yassel? You can feel the energy as his head is being decapitated, you know? It's just a lot of little things. You can feel their energy, and it's still there. The energy is still, it's been cleared pretty well, but the energy basically is still there. That was done by a machine. Sama.
Thank you, John. This has actually clarified a lot of issues within my tribe and in Cameroon.
Can you move out away from
Sorry. You see, what they explained, the discussion now has clarified a lot of issues within my tribe and in Cameroon. Before coming down from London, I had a friend whose father died, and he had to go home and assume the leadership of his family. And he said there were some rituals he had to do, but because he wasn't home for some time, so he had not participated in it with his father. And he had to do that after his father died because it had to be done immediately. And he didn't know what to do. So all he simply did was he went out to the father's grave and sat there and called upon him and said, look, what do you want me to do? And within about 15 minutes, his father was there. He was like in a slight slippery state. And his father was dictating everything he had to do, and he just wrote them down. And went and performed it. So the people who had to supervise the work, when they came and they thought that they were going to teach him, they just stood there and watched him, and he went through all the steps, and it took hours to go through all the steps. But he said his father gave it to him. See? So I now see, and also the stories like when in a family, when there is a major problem, the family head may actually sit down and decide to go to somebody who will call the person who was involved with that problem, who had passed on, to actually come and talk to them, although they wouldn't be seeing him. Thank you.
Now remember, that can be done through a medicine man, which will be called witchcraft in some circles. Okay? And that can also be done just by expanding your consciousness, where you contact the astral realm yourself, and you're able to speak to the people in that realm, just like I'm talking to you. That becomes a little bit difficult, because there again you have to protect yourself, because once the astral realm has somebody they can talk to, it's difficult for you because they don't want to leave you alone. They want to talk to somebody down here who's willing to listen. And you open up the energy field to let that flow, and it can become a dangerous thing. Okay? But this is wherein you must learn to lovingly and willingly endure all things, and not try to open up these channels in an unnatural way or force them open, but to let them flow as you open your own channels by the loss of your own resistance.
About a year ago, I inherited my mother's rings. It was an engagement ring and another friendship ring. I feel quite strongly that I really should pass them on. I have done for quite a while, but there's obviously quite a big emotional attachment to them. Is there any way, even though I don't wear them, that they could still be putting energy patterns on me?
Sure. Just feel the thought, feeling, and spoken word, and re-experience it in your own body until they're gone. And each time the feeling comes in, intensify it, and intensify it until it's no longer there. And then you're feeling it, and you feel a nice little vibration in the hand, and you see the big burst of violet flame, and you know that you have done the job. And then you feel perfectly fine about keeping them because they've been cleansed. This cleansing thing is a very important thing.
John, would you do the same with clearing a house? Would you sit down and receive the energies, etc., until you felt they were gone?
Yes. Now let's talk about... Did you have something more there? Oh, let's save it.
The other question was about if you have a family graveyard at your home, those spirits must be influencing the family. Surely, what can you do about that?
Oftentimes, where Anita and I lived in Titicaca, this gets kind of personal, all right? But one night, there was a great big party going on outside of our house. There's a mother crying and a baby crying and all kinds of racket going on. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning it continued on. And Anita and I couldn't get an ounce of sleep. And so I think I went out there. Did you go out at all? I know I went out.
I was up doing paperwork, and finally John got up, and I said to him, can you please go out and see what these people are doing, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're really making a lot of noise. So
I went out. I went to where all the noise was coming from, and there was nobody there. And yet the noise continued right around me, and there was nobody there. Now, that was interesting. And I thought, now what am I going to do about this? And then finally they went from where the party was, and they went out in front of our house and down the road, and went on down there until they disappeared. But the thing is, the party continued on. And the next day, I started talking about some of the people that live in the area. And oh, sure, that happens every year at the same time, because that's where the girl was born. I think the girl was born out of wedlock, and it upset the whole clan, so the clan did away with the baby, and the mother was all distressed. That's why she was crying. The baby was being killed, and that's why the baby was crying. And every year at the same time, you have this whole scene reenacted of this big party, and then taking it out on the baby and the mother. And so this all happened. Now, Anita and I didn't know quite what to do, because it wasn't on our property, and therefore we didn't have claim on that. But what we began to do is we began to clear our house from known entities that were there after point holdings. And for whatever reason, this is how we got in very close contact with the spirits, because the spirits started coming to our house by the droves. By the droves. And Anita got very close to some of them because they wanted to be free of the earth plane and didn't know how to do it. And so night after night after night after night after night for about 2 years, we had this general cleansing with just these dozens and dozens of cold winds that were there. And then you could just feel the airflow and all of these spirits that were free with a thank you connected with it. And this is where we become very, very close and very friendly with the spirits on the other side on the island of Rarotonga. Because we were doing them a favor, and they knew it, because they were being freed from something that they didn't want. But we had so much activity around that little house with all these spirits that were there asking for freedom and asking to be released. And I don't know how many hundreds or thousands we let go of, but it was just really an experience.
Yes, there's another incident that happened where John and I were invited to dinner to a person's house. And the minute I walked into the house, I just felt all these spirits, and not good energy, but a really degenerative energy around me. I just walked in, and there was no way I was going to eat dinner there. So, anyway, so I asked the woman whose house it was, I said, has anything gone on in this house? Because there's definitely something I'm feeling here. And she said, well, yes, there was a lot of prostitution in this house. And a lot of young girls being taken with older men. And then she says, she didn't realize she was going to have this problem, but then she took me through the whole house, and we went upstairs to the bedrooms, and all the rooms were painted in red and black with mirrors. And we just went from room to room to room. And John and I just kept giving the decree and giving the decree and giving the decree. And it was just so thick. The negative energy was just so thick. I could barely stay in the house myself.
I had no trouble sleeping that night. But what had taken place there was even the murders of young children. And all of that was all revealed because this was known in the area as a center for witchcraft in that particular area. And that it had been a place where all the young boys had come for male prostitution, and all the young girls came, and some of the boys and some of the girls had died there, and their bodies were disposed of in some way that nobody knew where they had gone or what had happened there. But I'll tell you, the place was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And it was even, remember out in the kitchen what happened? remember one of the spirits jumped, Yeah.
There was a loud noise in the kitchen. We didn't exactly know what it was. Do you remember what it was? I can't remember now.
It got everybody's attention, and the hair went up in the back of the neck because of just the cold wind going across and crash with no identifiable noise. And I want you to be aware that these things do indeed exist. You must develop the ability, if you're going to get involved in body electronics to any great degree, to where you are able then to fearlessly walk in where angels are where they fear to tread, so to speak, and be able to clean out the negative attitudes, the negative feelings, and the negative spirits that have been there for a long, long time that are no longer invited. If you go into a house where all these things are invited, you better say thank you very much and make your tracks elsewhere, because you will not be satisfactorily rewarded by any successful exorcism in a house where the spirits are invited by the people that have control or that own that house.
I just have a question and a comment. I'll do the question first. It relates to what you've just been talking about. Do you need to actually decree for every room in the house, or just the house itself?
Under normal circumstances, one decree is sufficient for the entire house. But in this house, you could feel these things hanging on by their fingernails and by their toenails in every corner of the room. And every room had to be cleansed to get this filthy spirit out of that house. They're just filthy. I don't want to get personal here. I will get personal. Many of you were here last year. And remember, there's one individual that whenever you walked by him, you felt this absolutely filthy, nauseous spirit that he carried with him wherever he went. The man who had absolutely no respect for women at all. Remember this? How many felt that spirit of absolute filth? Can I see a show of hands on that? Okay. And the thing is, you expect somebody to do a cranial on the person. Okay? Fair enough. And I would often wondered if I would allow that person to do a cranial on me. Fair enough. You see what I'm talking about? We have our freedom and we have our agency in these matters. But there are some people that have a filthy spirit, and all you have to do is walk by them, and you feel like you have to take a bath for a week. And I haven't noticed that spirit here. But I have noticed it in other seminars where some people will not let go of their, what I would call their filthy habits. Now some people say, well, all habits are of God, and there's no such thing as a filthy habit. Well, it certainly is a filthy habit when it drags in entities which are filthy right along with them. And I just want to make that clear. So you folks will have to realize that you're going to have to make choices as to which people are going to be in your classes or not. And once in a while, one person will slip through the net somewhere along the line to where they did not get the proper training or the classwork to be there. And this is where you need to keep the prayers out there very thoroughly, that only the people who should be in that class will be there, and everyone else will get blocked so they can't make it. And that's where you then somehow have the people in the classes that are not going to disrupt the class, like this other individual did on a continual basis.
I just wanted to make a comment after hearing Lewis and Chris's story. At lunchtime, I went into my room and I have a ring that was given to me as a gift that is an antique ring from the early 1800s. And I went to put it on, and just when I picked it up, I just thought, oh, no, I can't wear this until I clear it. And I just thought it was interesting that that was going on for them at that time.
John, I'm still not clear about whether it's enough to do the decree in a house or in a family graveyard, or whether you do need to go through the process of receive.
I'm not clear either. Because if the spirit there is attached to that family graveyard, and they claim ownership on that family graveyard, and they claim ownership on that headstone and gravestone and body that is there, you are actually intruding on their space, aren't you? And consequently, here's where a lot of decrees fail, because the person feels that you are the intruder, not them. You with me on that? You with me on that? And this is where you have to be very careful to be sure that you're walking on ground where you know that it's your space and the other person's not invited into your space. I'm going to say this again. I said this the first week. I believe, although I like to have all the proof laid out before me, but I believe that all illness is entity related. And oftentimes when we're living close to a graveyard, and for whatever reason, the spirits in that graveyard lay claim to your house and to your property, and then lay claim to your body with an energy overlay, they will bring their illnesses in with them and overshadow you with their illness. If it is a problem, as I have seen, with female disorders, then the person will have female disorders. It is a problem with a shoulder that was all degenerated from an apparent arthritic situation, with a corresponding pigment spot in the eye. When that particular entity is gone, the spot disappears and the shoulder is just fine. There are other situations of different illnesses that people have that can come from being in close proximity to a graveyard. And this is where you have to realize that the people say, this is my headstone, this is my grave, I paid for it, and I own it, and they're not going to leave by decree. You may be able to get them out of your house, or out of your rooms in your house, or out of the land around your house, but for the graveyard, it'll be very difficult to do that, because they feel that's their space and they own it. And it would take a very powerful person with tremendous powers of persuasion and tremendous powers of shall we say, ego force to talk them out of their habitation.
In Germany, you can have either a family graveyard, or you can buy just one or a double grave for a certain amount of years, which is 30 years. And thereafter, the family has to decide either to buy it again for another 30 years, or they can give it free. It will be cleared to be used again. After hearing all that, my question is, in case the family members decide not to buy it again, then it will be used again, what then will happen with the people who have been buried there? What might happen?
There again are all of your shades of gray in between your black and white. I'm sure that I do not know, but each of those will have to be treated on an individual basis. Now, Bob, you had a question earlier that we closed the class on. Do you want to bring that up now, sir?
Just one thing on Irmgard's question. You can go walking through a cemetery where there's hundreds or thousands of different graves, some of which have been there for short periods of time, some of which have been there for hundreds of years. And if you just walk around the graveyard and just spend a little time in each space, sooner or later it'll be pretty obvious to you that in many of the spaces there's nothing there. There's no longer any energy there. There's no trace whatsoever of the spirit that was occupying the body that was once buried there. And in other cases, even after a long, long time, there's still a very obvious trace of the spirit there. And in my experience, that doesn't have that much to do with time. In other words, it's not like the ones that have only been there a few years are there and the ones that have been there hundreds of years are gone. It's not necessarily that simple. It seems to have a lot more to do with the energy of the individual at the moment of death. So, just to go back to your question, in some cases, it wouldn't make a dime's worth of difference because the spirit's long gone. They might have been gone after a very, very short time, let alone 30 years, whereas in other situations, they're still going to be there in that space for a long time to come. So as John said, a lot of shades of gray. It'll be very individual.
Before lunch, the subject of prayer was being discussed fairly readily, and what my contribution was to be is about prayer. And I made the observation after doing this seminar last year and being reminded whilst here that the list is a very important part of your life. And although I had been aware of doing the list prior to coming here, I hadn't done it on a regular basis and I hadn't given it a lot of importance because I was one of the white board brigade and I did a list in my mind. I thought that's what I was doing. But it occurred to me while doing the list after leaving Gennezano last year that this was the most powerful form of prayer that any one of us here are likely to do in this lifetime. We are, in fact, clearing our lower self. We are making amends for complexes that have not been balanced. And we are genuinely asking the God within to supply us with what we want. And this is our direct route to God.
Bob, that's marvelous.
Just like everyone in the room to reach down and grab the back of their calf muscle on their adrenal point, just push it really hard. Oh, no, you're already awake. Okay. Sorry, just a little observation. I've done it myself from time to time. I just thought I'd pick you up on it. Okay, the question I wanted to ask before was, if we look at the monopoles, there's three aspects to it. You were talking about being in Pine Gap and being picked up from that alien influence on one beam, two beam, and then the third beam, where they would have hold of you. And
holographically, three directions.
Okay, my question from a numbers point of view is the numbers 3 come up a lot of times. The numbers 7 come up as in 7 chakras or 7th heaven. 3 7s are 21. 21 seems to come up a lot of time with the immune system, with 21 of the 5 rites that you do, 21 days that Dr. Asui meditated on the mountain for. I guess 12's important, otherwise you wouldn't have 12 points on everything you do. So if you could just do something with the numbers, okay? I don't know anything about numbers.
Are you number illiterate? Later. Okay. Doug? Let's leave this for now, shall we?
I was going to do something about graveyards.
You want to do something about graveyards?
I just want to say one more thing about graveyards.
Oh, fine.
Okay. If you go around to graveyards in different parts of the world and you start to look at this concept of like places where the spirits will be very, very prominent there, and where it will be very, very obvious that there still is very strong presence of a soul there, in the area of the grave. And then you look at, other areas where you might find very, very little present there. I think on the one hand, you have to look at it from the perspective of the spirit there, and certainly their attitude at the time of death is going to have a lot to do with whether they're going to hang around and just how long they're going to be hanging around, if not indefinitely. But I think it's also something that we need to look at from the other perspective, which is what is the pattern of belief within the living members of that family, which may be a cultural thing or it may just be a very individual thing. Because I think the continued presence of this, and I'm not making any cultural or personal patterns right or wrong here, it's just an observation, but for example, in a lot of the Polynesian cultures, there's a very strong belief, as John has said, in the presence of the ancestors, and it's just a day-to-day reality for so many people. It's something that's expected, and people identify the presence of their ancestors as still being in that area. And so if you visit graveyards in a Polynesian culture, you're struck by the very, very obvious presence of ancestral spirits there. You go to some other areas, perhaps in a like say a European type culture, and in many areas you find not a total absence of that, but a real minimum of that. And I would say that part of that is a real cultural thing. If people are not giving a lot of attention or energy from this side, then the spirits after a certain point are likely to lose interest and go elsewhere because there's nothing feeding them anymore. And from here in mortality, many people do identify what do a lot of people do when they want to get back in touch with their grandfather or grandmother? Where do they go? They go to where they're buried. I mean, they go to the grave. They bring flowers there. They go visit it on the birthday or the wedding anniversary or whatever the particular dates are. So, I mean, I'm just saying that I think that it's a two-way street as well. I think that we play a pretty big role in keeping those spirits there as well, just by our belief systems and by our actions.
Are you all aware in Europe that there's quite a few haunted houses? Hey? No haunted houses? You go to England. You go to England, for example, and all the old houses have their family ghost. You go to the eastern part of the United States, the old houses there, and they all have their family ghost, and they live with them, and they show up from time to time. I'm kind of interested in that sort of thing because of the tremendous influence these family ghosts have on the relatives and family that live there, because they respect grandma's wishes and so on. And so these things do exist. I don't know of any part of the world where you don't have the influence of those beyond the veil of existence as we know it, beyond death. The influence is there. Among the Indian people, you have a lot of it. You have that in Brazil. I understand you have a great deal of that, of the respect of the voodoo and so on that is taught there. When Catholicism, when the Mass is said, then everyone goes to their voodoo ceremonies. And so they mix their Catholic Mass with the voodoo ceremonies. It's quite an interesting phenomena from the information I've been able to gather about it. There's so much. I feel there's something left unsaid. Any questions here? Okay, Sama.
I got a question. I have two questions. One of my problem is, how do you actually know that a spirit was invited or not? Say, for example, you go to a place and somebody is actually having problems, and he's not willing to tell you. Maybe he had actually invited the spirit and he's no longer willing to admit it, and maybe the spirit will then stay there laying claim that it was invited by that person, but the person won't tell you. How do you know?
You don't. When in doubt, don't interfere.
Okay. Now, this is just an observation I saw. I made in Cameroon between 1976 and 79. I was in Yaoundé, and I noticed that amongst the tribes people, if somebody died, they'll keep that person for at least 3 days, and they'll just be looking at the corpse and maybe praying or whatever. But after the person was buried, they left a lighted lamp on the grave, I think for 7 days or something. Can you comment on that?
I don't know anything about it.
I don't either. Okay. Okay, Doug. Continue.
Well, I just had a question, actually. Do you think it's possible to see a ghost with the naked eye?
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Okay, that was it.
Haven't you ever seen one?
Well, yeah, but I was just trying to figure out if it was, because I've seen them other times where it was more like in the mind's eye, but there was a couple
Doug,
times.
They can look as real as you look there, except there's no substance.
Well, I didn't go over to find out.
Okay, I do. Next time, go over and find out. Put your hand out. Give them the sign. and find out where they're coming from. If they're coming from God, you're not going to offend them. You chase them off if they're coming from the other side.
It was their house.
Same thing.
I was just a guest.
Okay. We have a number of things here that need to be discussed, and I'm going to ask Doug to just take charge of that, and we'll go for it.
Are we on, Sakara? Okay. Just something that we don't want to really make a big issue over, but just in general, when you're doing the point holding, it's really, really advantageous if the person can be lying in a basically flat on their back in a nice symmetrical position, not with the head up like this on pillows or anything, but keeping as John would say, keeping the antenna straight. And obviously, we don't always have enough tables or mats to go around, and some of you are doing cranials out on a bench with the person's head in your lap, so it's not always possible to do this. But ideally, for this work, especially for the cranial work, you're going to get much better results if you got your antenna straight. So lie in a nice, straight, symmetrical position, flat on the back, not on your side unless you really have to, and definitely just keep the spine right up through the neck and into the head. Keep that in a good straight line. Just another suggestion as well, you really want to try to avoid crossing the arms and legs when you're having your points held as well. A lot of people I notice will have their ankles crossed or their arms crossed across the abdomen, and that tends to just short-circuit all your meridians. So you're really better off having your legs just straight ahead and uncrossed, and having your arms at your sides. So just something for you all to consider there. We got a bunch of questions still on the docket from yesterday. Number 3, what is the significance of the sunken bridge of the nose? Carol already had asked me this question in private, and I really don't know what the significance. She's referring to a situation where this part here is just way caved in on people. And she said that she'd read that it was affiliated or associated with, I don't know what, insanity or something or another, but...
This is a personological trait that I would prefer not getting into at this point of time. I have encouraged all of you to write the Personology Institute. You have the address for that. And get trained in the basics of personology, which will help you tremendously to understand the various character traits related to the structures of the head. So this will be extremely invaluable to you. This is a personological trait, and I don't think we need to go into that at this time, because it just opens a whole bunch of questions, and which we'd rather not get into, because it's otherwise we do just a very poor job of hitting one point without going into all of the other different areas, which would mitigate the understanding of that one point.
What is the effect of the absence of wisdom teeth on cranials, if any? Well, any dental deformity of any sort, whether it's missing teeth or crooked teeth or cavities in teeth or root canals or any type of dental problem, is going to have an impact on the body just by reflex alone. So in that sense, whatever organs or glands are reflexed from the wisdom teeth, if your wisdom teeth aren't there, you're obviously going to have some degree of difficulty in those organs and glands. As far as actually doing the cranial work, I mean, you can do a cranial on somebody without any teeth. I mean, we have plenty of people that have full plates, and you just take them right out and go right ahead and do the cranial, same as you would on a person with all their teeth. So I don't think there's necessarily a huge effect as far as doing the cranial if a person doesn't have their wisdom teeth. Actually, in my experience, most people don't have their wisdom teeth. I mean, how many people here have all 4 wisdom teeth in their head right now? I mean, actually, all the way out through the gums. So it's a minority of people to begin with, anyways, in the Western cultures. Okay. Number 5. Do tailbones generally need to be done before each cranial, i.e., do they tend to curl up again? That's something that's going to vary from one person to the next. I've seen some people whose tailbones have come out in one session and have apparently remained in good shape pretty much indefinitely. I've seen other people where they have gone back a bit. I've seen a few people where they've had to have their tailbones done maybe 4 or 5 times because the first 3 or 4 times nothing happens. You just get a lot of numbness and electricity, and the tailbone doesn't really change at all. So it's a pretty individual thing. best thing to do before cranial is just check and see if it needs doing.
I think that it would be wise to understand that many people have cranial work done and tailbone work done, yet they don't do a thing to control their own emotionality or their word patterns. They don't work at it. They don't be responsible for their thought patterns. And as a result, the tailbone goes right back into position, and just like it was before any tailbone work was ever done. And this is where we're talking yesterday for a short time there about the need for developing the spiritual aspect of the individual and helping them. And now, instructors, you're going to need to know this, because none of us in this room are in that boat, of course, that we don't pay attention all the time. I mean, all of us pay attention to our word patterns and thought patterns and our emotions. We do that all the time. None of us are going to be irresponsible in this one area, are we? Now anyway, when we're dealing with our students, that's another matter, because they haven't learned to do this properly yet. And you're going to have to explain to them the necessity of continual watchfulness over thought, feeling, and spoken word, or else their little tail might be back between their legs again, and their tailbone right along with that. And so the word patterns that we carry with us, I find sometimes to my chagrin that many people just don't want to control their thoughts, and they want to continue to blame other people and circumstances around them for their thought patterns, rather than recognize that their thought patterns are creating the outer conditions for themselves. And so people have a tendency to wallow, and they wallow and wallow and wallow and wallow, because they're focusing on the outer conditions rather than the inner essence which has created these outer conditions. And so the thing is the tailbone is only an outer condition. In whatever shape it is, whatever calcification it's in, whether it goes back in position, and the same thing with cranial work. This is an outer condition. And we have to learn to control our thoughts every moment.
When a person learns to control all that, can it happen that the tailbone will curl back by itself, or is point holding in any case necessary?
The tailbone will not curl back by itself. It'll curl back when we do not watch our thought patterns and we start thinking in some sort of a negative way. Then the tailbone will definitely curl back on its own as a reflection of the thought patterns that we haven't been responsible for. Okay?
But sometimes if you scratch, Irmgard, sometimes if you scratch right behind the ear, it'll go a little bit from side to side. Okay, number 6. When is the appropriate time to point hold for the payer's patches? If you look at your Jensen eye chart, the payer's patches are over about roughly 0 degree to the thyroid and parathyroid in there in zone 2. And they're tissue that is within the small intestine, and they are, one of their functions, as I understand it, appears to be lymphatic in nature. I'm not really totally certain what else they do. As far as when to hold points for them, I don't even really know specifically a point that would be for the payer's patches other than points that would be for the small intestines. But I suppose you would hold for them, just go along with the flow sheet until you come to small intestines, and that would probably be about the right time.
As far as I can tell, there are no specific points for the payer's patches. The payer's patches are lymphatic tissue in the upper part of the small intestine. Now, what we have to deal with here is when a person goes back through old fevers, then the payer's patches here are activated, and by reflex action, this then opens up the thyroid to where it can function normally. And so this is, but there's no specific points for the payer's patches other than bringing the person up to the level of re-experience to where a person can go back through the number of fevers that earlier in life destroyed the payer's patches through a high fever.
Where can we get the herb mentioned in Doug's book for the spleen, and what exactly is it? It is listed as myrtle or periwinkle, but I thought that these were two different herbs.
The botanical name for that should be Vinca minor. It is known as periwinkle. It is also known as the lesser myrtle. And there's different names for myrtle in different places, so you have to go by the botanical name of the Vinca minor. And Vinca minor is specific for the spleen. If you can find the Vinca minor and get a little crop of that growing in your yard, it's a beautiful ground cover, but it's also take about 10 leaves a day in a green drink, and it will have a definite therapeutic effect upon the spleen. And remember, the spleen will also be associated to the blue spots in the sclera, and will be associated with the apathetic attitudes that we have. So this will help, at least on a mechanical, physical level, to release the blockages we have there, so that we can get to the source of the problem, which will be in the emotional mental areas.
Can a stricture in the colon be effectively worked on through the foot if difficult to find on the body? You can certainly, in many cases, work effectively on a stricture right in the abdomen, but what do you have to be very careful about? You have to be very careful that the person's got good nerve supply in that area, because otherwise you're going to do a lot of damage to the person. So you'll find that for many people with a stricture, if it's not safe to do on the abdomen, which it won't be in some cases, you need to go somewhere else to work on it. The bottom part of the heel of the foot, you'll have your large intestine. But of course, your other reflex that I would recommend very, very strongly, which we went over a few weeks back, is on the side of the leg on what's called the fascia lata. Well, you remember, as you go up your right leg from the knee up to the hip, that's equivalent to going from your cecum up the ascending and around to the midpoint in the transverse. In other words, as I go from right here up to right here, that's equivalent to going like this, around like that, where this will be towards the knee, this will be coming up the side of my right leg, and this will be up towards the top of the right leg. Then you pick it up on the left side, and as you go down the leg like this, that's from the top of the upper leg down to the knee, that's equivalent to going from the midpoint of the transverse down around the flexure, down the descending colon, sigmoid, and then rectum. Now, you got a couple other things to be aware of. Since the rectum's a midline structure, it'll actually show up on both legs right above the knee. The anus and the rectum will show up on either leg right above the knee. And then you'll remember your ileocecal valve is going to be roughly where your middle finger would hit on the side on your right leg. But basically, if you find the stricture in the eye, where you find the indentation in the autonomic nerve wreath, just figure out where the appropriate area on the leg is and poke around there till you get a good sore spot, and you're probably on the right spot there. It's pretty effectively held with either thumbs or an elbow, and the person can be either lying face up or face down. So it's a point that you can do most any time. It works quite well. Okay. Please outline the dosages of Schweitzer for more severe problems, for example, cancer and difficult viruses such as retroviruses, including chronic fatigue, herpes, and so forth. The Schweitzer is, as we've said in the past, is very, very good for boosting the immune system. And in some cases, people with cancer and other serious problems have done pretty massive amounts of Schweitzer. I mean, I know of people doing as much as, say, 6 ounces 3 times a day, which would be a fairly colossal amount of Schweitzer, I'm sure most of you can imagine. In my experience, even somebody doing like, say, 2 ounces 3 times a day, that can be pretty intense for most people. So as far as we know, there's no toxicity with the Schweitzer, no matter how much you take. Excuse me? An ounce is about, what, 30 mil? Something like that. So say if you were doing, say, 2 ounces 3 times a day, that'd be getting up towards 200 mils a day. 60 mils 3 times a day. But I mean, really, the dosage could vary tremendously. I've certainly seen people benefit quite a lot from doing, say, people with serious problems. I've seen them do in the vicinity of say 200 to 400 mils a day. total, for the day, with quite wonderful results. You can do more. It'll definitely put you into a whale of a healing crisis if you get up to these colossal doses.
I think that it would be wise to point out that we have seen people with breast tumors disappear on 6 ounces 3 times a day, which would be about 180 mils 3 times a day. That'll put you right up to about 540 mils a day. That's quite a little bit. We have seen people with fibroid tumors on 6 ounces 3 times a day, and we have seen those fibroid tumors gradually shrink out of existence. The taste grows on you. Sometimes it becomes far more repulsive later on than what you start with. And it's just one of those things that you take down. There is appears to be a boron element in your Schweitzer formula, which goes through a transmutational stage, because after the stuff is mixed and you have your end Schweitzer result, the boron disappears from the formula. And so there's some sort of a tremendous biological transmutation that takes place, and where certain elements are I'll use the word, in an unstabilized form, so they cannot be identified normally through any type of analysis. And we find this in colloidal type minerals, where the different minerals like gold, silver, platinum, and so on, in certain colloidal ores are in an unstabilized form that do not show up on a regular assay work. And yet when they are stabilized, you have maybe 2,000 ounces of gold per ton in some of these very high complex ores. And having worked with these ores quite considerably, I know a little bit about this. The elements, as they are moving from one element to another, actually will disappear from any standard form of chemical analysis. Now, you're going to have to understand that it will not show up on a standard method of chemical analysis. And then using various vibrations, heat and light and pressure, then these things will stabilize out in another form than what they may have started in. And so technically there's a tremendous transmutational factor that the Schweitzer formula will have on the physical body. For example, if you have a tumor of any kind in the body and you take a certain amount of Schweitzer, say 6 ounces 3 times a day, you'll find that the tumor itself will go into a hyperthermia and begin to heat up. And you can feel that heat continually working on that particular tumor structure as the mass begins to dissolve and get smaller. Now, the problem will be, and you will have this problem, is some people just don't want to bother with the bad taste. And they just can't stomach it, in their own words. And this is something you'll have to work with, because people have their choices. But I don't know how to get around that. Some people seem to want to avoid the very thing that'll help them the most. And they always put it off till tomorrow because the taste isn't good, or the pain resulting from the product that they take will be more than they can handle. And so we've got a little problem in that area. I want to go back to the question here on the foot. You can have different reflex points on the foot in the colon area and the small intestine area, which are very workable, but remember these are reflex points, and it'd be much better to work directly and gently on the various strictures that you would have in the colon, and work directly on that scar tissue by gentle compression. And then as that scar tissue dissolves, you'll see the end result of that with the reduction of the stricture in the iris of the eye.
Is it possible to mix the Schweitzer with something else, or must it be taken alone?
Okay, if you take the Schweitzer and mix that with something else, say herbal formulations that are highly mineralized, like different barks and different roots and so on, it will actually cause a permanent purplish stain. And if you mix it, and you'll see that it will form a kind of a purple color. If you have a highly mineralized water and you mix the Schweitzer in that water, it'll have a purple tint to it. And this does stain. And it doesn't come out.
What about, say, putting a bit in your smoothie in the morning?
Won't hurt at all. It won't hurt at all. It might ruin the taste of the smoothie.
But just figure out a way to get it down.
Will the Schweitzer reaction with the various minerals, for example, affect the quality of this product itself? That is, if we use water and it's reacting with water, will the end product still be the same as the Schweitzer we use, we prepare with our clean water?
Seems to work just fine.
Okay.
We haven't found it to be affected in any negative way.
Is there any point in a person taking it if they don't like the taste and having a reactive pattern towards it?
Yes, they should still continue to take it regardless of how they can't handle the taste.
Even in relatively small dosages, like a tablespoon a few times a day, it's going to be quite beneficial for everybody to keep the immune system up. So I'd recommend everybody take it.
I think I'll mention this again. I know that Dr. Van Beveren, I think he's at Princeton University still, he has live blood cell analysis equipment there, and he says when everything is not really moving, like for example the white blood cells in the blood under live blood cell analysis is not moving with people who live in fluoridated areas. The immune system is not functioning for them. About 30 seconds after they take the Schweitzer, they take the blood and then take a look at the blood, and the red or the white blood cells are just moving everywhere. They're doing their job. So it does enhance the immune system tremendously.
Can people which are not on the program take the Schweitzer formula?
With no ill effects.
After reading an article in Health Conscious magazine about Doug and all his mushrooms that he likes to eat, I got a hold of some Schweitzer, and I began to drink it heavily, like I was doing a couple of cups a day. And I'm still here doing fine. I also found if a cold was coming on, if you take a little extra right away, there's no cold that shows up, but you got to catch it right away. Yeah, the sore throats, well, that's how I kind of gauge an indication. So, you guys can experiment if you want, but I did, and all I find is that you just get more energy and things seem to be a little more intense. So,
which some people like.
Continue on.
I think we got a few more questions.
If the Schweitzer, when you've got a cold coming on, and the cold doesn't happen, isn't that then a suppressing, like the vitamins, like the ascorbic acid?
What you find oftentimes is Schweitzer increases the discharge of the phlegm, shall we say, and it causes a very rapid discharge, just like, and it brings the cold to a rapid end. I don't think it suppresses it, but it helps you get the mucus out.
I've had the experience on quite a few occasions of going into like a bit of a cold or flu type situation, and where I'm getting fevers and shakes and chills and joint pains and all the rest. And I found that if I just get in bed and about every hour or so take a big slug of Schweitzer and maybe 20 drops or so of the oxygen of the O7, that what it tends to do is it tends to accelerate the whole process. You still go through all the pain, you still go through all the aches and the pains and the shakes and the chills and the fever and everything else. But my experience has been is that it compresses it down into like maybe 6 or 8 hours instead of like 3 or 4 days. It just helps you to get through it quicker.
Have you got any experience of how long the Schweitzer actually keeps? In the crystal form or in the, when it's diluted already? A year or something?
Indefinite.
The one thing I'd recommend is you really want to store it in glass, because it does react with certain plastics, which is pretty obvious because you can taste the plastic in the Schweitzer. Okay, next question is, if psyllium is contraindicated where strictures are present in the colon, would soaked ground linseed be safe as a bulk laxative? I'm not totally certain whether psyllium really is contraindicated. I've believed that in the past based on some bad experiences I've had taking lots of psyllium. But on the other hand, it may just be a heck of a healing crisis on that. So there's a lot of mixed opinions on whether or not psyllium is good for everybody. I've talked to a lot of colon therapists, and you get some that swear by it and some that swear at it, and you get a lot of different opinions on that. So I'll turn that question over to John.
You drink a lot of water and you should have no problems. Most problems come by not drinking enough liquid, which the psyllium, of course, expands and absorbs the liquid. And if you don't have enough liquid, then the stuff will actually kind of harden up in there.
Like concrete?
Not really, but sludge. It just won't move through there. And I think bentonite will be very difficult to get out of your system because bentonite will harden up like concrete, and we've had some very serious problems that I've worked with personally, where the bentonite has clogged up in the cecum area and also in a number of the fecaliths. And finally, when the fecaliths came out and we got these big blocks of concrete to finally move out of the cecum area, it was very, very painful for the person to get this out of their system. It just kind of reamed them out on the way through. But I want you to be very careful of bentonite unless it's used with other herbs and material which will help to move that stuff through with tremendous amounts of water and tremendous amounts of massage work so it doesn't set up in the cecum. I don't find that the psyllium will do that. It'll just simply set up in there and kind of a sludge, a very heavy sludge, which is very difficult to move out and can cause a person some degree of constipation if enough water is not taken.
What I do in reading a person's eye is if I find that they have a lot of the stricturing, particularly down in the descending and sigmoid colon, what I recommend to them if they're going to do psyllium is simply that they start off with a really, really minimal dose, like maybe a 1/4 teaspoon or something, plenty of water, and just see how the body responds, and then gradually increase the dose, because I think where most people run into problems is where they immediately go in, people with strictures, that is. I think where they tend to run into problems is where they immediately jump in with like 2 or 3 big spoonfuls of psyllium and maybe not all that much water, and that's usually where they get into trouble. So I just recommend for people with strictures that they just, build up gradually and, don't overdo it at first.
Just another note on psyllium, I've noticed that people with a cold constitutional type sometimes are affected adversely by the psyllium because it has a cold damp influence, and they feel just like it bogs their whole lower abdomen. And I found that if you put some ginger powder in with the psyllium, that they're able to handle it a lot better.
How about a tablespoon of cayenne pepper?
Which end?
Okay, continue on, Doug. Okay.
Okay, next question. Do you have a remedy for tinea, which I guess is ringing? What's that? Is that ring? That's athlete's foot.
No, this is...
That's athlete's foot, yeah. Different things, in my experience, different things have worked well for different people. Some people have gotten results with Schweitzer. Others have gotten results with hydrogen peroxide topically on it. Actually, a lot of people have gotten very good results just peeing on their foot in the shower, and that seems I'm quite serious. That's a lot of people have gotten rid of athlete's foot just urine, fresh urine, your own, hopefully.
Urine therapy works beautifully on any type of a skin disease, or even your various breakings out, any type of skin problems, eczema included.
Yeah, so any of the above would be quite good for athlete's foot.
Okay, now tinea. What is the exact definition of tinea? Eh? It's fungus. Now, did you mean tinnitus? Pardon? Tinnitus or tinnitus is in the ear. That's not what you meant by tinea. Okay, good. Usually your tinea is a red rash. It's defined as a red rash that's on the body from time to time.
Just on urine, I was listening to this fella on the radio one day. This bloke was about 80. He'd been diagnosed with terminal cancer about 20 years earlier, and his wife about 25 years earlier. And he heard about this remedy of drinking your own urine. So he drank a cup of his own urine for the last 20 years, and he reckoned he hadn't had a sign of cancer since he started. He said his wife stuck to it for about 5 years, and then she got sick of drinking her own urine, and he reckoned she was dead within 3 years of pulling up.
Thank you.
As you actually mentioned, tinnitus or whatever, however you pronounce it, could you perhaps say something about that, John? If there's, if one can do anything about it, and the other thing, this tinnitus or whatever, it's this ringing in the ears, and the other question is, when you have, when you lose the color of the skin, I don't know what that's called. Thank you.
Let's start with the ringing in the ears. Usually that's a calcification of the three inner bones of the ear, the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. When that calcification is removed from the inner ear, then that ringing of the ear disappears. And that can take quite a little while, because the ears and the eyes appear to be about the last two things to come, shall we say, come to their senses. You will find that the ears often indicate the person's unwillingness to hear. And when they get in touch with, I just don't want to hear, like if it's on the left side, it's not wanting to hear females, or feminine energy, not wanting to receive hearing. If it's on the right side, it's oftentimes not willing to deal with masculine energy. So the hearing problems on the left or the right side will be an indication of problems that a person has dealt with, or hasn't dealt with in their life. Now, so the same thing with eyesight. When you deal with the eyesight properly, and you get back into word patterns of I don't want to see, then oftentimes the eyesight will clear up very quickly. We've had people who have had eyeglasses the size of the bottoms of a Coke bottle, and they go through about 7 different changes of glasses until they no longer need glasses at all, just after going through I don't want to see. Word patterns have a tremendous impact on eyesight and on hearing. So that we need to look at. It's not just a mechanical thing, but I understand from people who have done this, tremendous amounts of chlorophyll, wheatgrass juice, and so on, and magnesium bring the hearing back quite rapidly, and also help to eradicate, if all things are in order, will help to eradicate the cataract conditions in the eyes. Pardon me? Ginkgo basically helps to get the oxygen moving, and that's as always. Your Ginkgo balboa is a wonderful source of that. especially if you mix it with the gotu kola. It helps get the oxygen directly to the cells. In cardiovascular disease, it's a great cure.
So you don't think that the ringing in the ears has anything to do with outside frequencies? Outside frequencies.
The question is ringing in the ears, can that be associated with outside frequencies? Some people are very, very sensitive to certain types of sounds and outside frequencies. We had one in northern part of New Zealand where just the frequency from a pump across a bay would keep a person awake all night and make them actually deathly ill. So sometimes you hear things, if you're sensitive enough, that other people cannot hear, because everyone has a little bit of a different threshold genetically imbued on the hearing. Some people can hear better than others. Some people can hear higher frequencies than others. And I'd say, yes, this will have a bearing on a person. I know the French have done a tremendous amount of work with high-frequency sounds, and they found some people are capable of hearing them, making them deathly ill.
A friend of mine got ringing in the ears just before I came out here, so I had cause to investigate it a bit. And I was told that ear candling was actually very good, and also inhaling chamomile and lavender oil would also help.
These will help.
I believe that for many people, the ringing in the ear can also be related to the amalgam fillings, where a lot of people have that, and then when the fillings are out, the ringing in the ear can disappear.
I do know that if you study your ear acupuncture charts, you'll find that some people who penetrate with a, shall we say, with an ear puncture for an earring, and they puncture through the area which is directly related to the eyes begin to go bad. And if they put a puncture right through the ear area for hearing, then the ear will begin to go bad. And so oftentimes the placement of earrings in the ear have a great deal to do with health. If you have one particular spot in the ear, in the lobe of the ear, which has to do with teeth, and you put a acupuncture, not an acupuncture, but you puncture the area for an earring right through the teeth center, the teeth will go bad in some cases. And so you have to be very careful of where you put your the earrings and so on, and it's probably best not to have them at all, and let them heal back up, because just the positioning of any type of a injury to an acupuncture part of the body, which will correspond to a certain organ, like in the ear for just regular earrings, all of these here will have an effect on a different part of the body corresponding to the acupuncture point.
Just a bit more information about the French with their high frequency. The scientist or doctor that did a lot of work is by the name of Tomasi, if you can get any of his information. But I have a friend that's using tapes that are produced specifically with really good music. It's like Mozart, and they gradually widen the tones somehow on it, and the frequency has got rid of a lot of. He's an airline pilot, and he's got a lot of problems with his hearing. And what's happened is it's correcting the bones in his ears. He's getting his hearing's coming back magically with these tapes, and all he does is walk around with a Walkman on all day and has it very quietly going, and he can talk normally. And you've got to have it on for about 6 hours a day. And he's got, I think it's about 3 months you've got to do it, and his hearing's improving dramatically, and his immune system is much better, and there's a whole lot of things going on. So there's some really good work there if you want to investigate it.
There's one more in this one. I got these ones, but just one more simple question.
It's environmental. I've noticed a lot more ringing in my ears since I've been out here. was a joke. Oh. I just said I've noticed a lot more ringing in my ears since I've been out here.
That's feedback. Okay, do you recommend unpasteurized goat's milk? I think that diet is quite a continuum. It's not black and white. There's a lot more gray than there is black and white. And for a lot of people, if not most people, the unpasteurized goat milk would be quite a wonderful thing. There's probably some people that won't do very well with it. There may be some people for whom it would not be a help. But I think for most people, it would probably be a very good thing to have in the diet. You know, if you can get the raw, unpasteurized goat's milk fresh.
Remember this, that the adult male, after the age of 3, loses the ability to digest dairy products. And lactase will be a very important enzyme to add to the diet if you are taking any type of dairy products internally. Now, even though goat's milk is the nearest thing we have to mother's milk, it still has to be digested. And even the small baby, once they get their teeth, they lose the ability to digest properly even mother's milk. And that's why the small children then go more onto a heavy diet. And of course, the mother is going to be reminded, if she nurses the child, that the little baby has teeth, and very quickly weans the child. So that's important also. You handle that.
I didn't mention that Saturday.
You handle that.
Which one do you want to do?
You handle it.
Okay, back to Saturday's discussion. Just we were talking a lot about the, John was bringing up the experience that he's had, and which many people here have had, where you've worked on somebody, and in a very, very short period of time, a pretty substantial regeneration has taken place in the other person's body. There's been a very profound healing taking place. And then you're left feeling drained. And we talked about this for a while Saturday, I think most of you will remember. And we looked a lot at concepts like non-resistance and protecting ourselves and all the rest. And one thing that I neglected to mention then, just to kind of throw into the mix here, just consider in Scripture the passage where Christ is walking through the crowd, and the one woman just touches the hem of his garment and is healed. And if you read that passage carefully, the reason that he knew that she touched his garment was because he felt his virtue or power flow from him. I mean, it says that fairly clearly in Scripture there. So I look at this whole concept, and to me it's like, yes, on the one hand, our relative state of resistance probably has a lot to do with us being drained. I mean, certainly if we are holding points and we're resisting the person on the table, or we're resisting the pain in our own hands and all that sort of stuff, clearly we're going to be very, very drained as a result of our own resistance. But I believe that, even if we got to a very, very minimal level of resistance, I think it's still quite possible that there is some sort of draining that takes place, because obviously at that point in Jesus' life, let's just put it this way, he had a lot less resistance than any of us here have right now. And yet even if he felt drained to some extent, if he felt like something had passed from him, from the woman, touching the hem of his garment there, then to me it shouldn't be all that surprising that people here might feel a little bit drained from time to time when something's happened. Okay.
Any comments?
Seem to be up here a lot today. I had a few thoughts about it on Saturday, because when I do healing, I know that I'm channeling universal energy and I just let it flow. But I sometimes wonder that when you've got somebody on the table and you really want that something for them to be healed, I wonder if you start blocking the universal energy and actually start using your own. You're really you're wanting it for somebody.
When you're dealing with a specific condition, technically, we should be in a position where we are not going to put expectations on outcomes, but allow, like in Reiki energy, allow the energy to flow and be used for the highest and best good of the individual. Okay, and just let happen what happens, without putting a limitation. on or a restriction on how the person is going to be healed. Okay? Now that's one thing. Now this is being rather yin about it. Okay? And when we're yin, we let things flow without resistance and just whatever happens, happens. That's very fine and good. But there is another era that we should consider carefully, and that is bringing about what we would call something which would be a that we could classify as a good action. And that good action is where we individually then are responsible for making decisions and then doing things to bring about what we would call a good work. Now, I believe that individually we all have that responsibility to, on one hand, let the energy flow, and once we've been able to do that well, then be responsible for bringing forth a good work. And that good work could be, case in point, working on Ken yesterday. Now, I would consider that a good work, even though after I worked on him, I felt quite depleted. Fair enough. And this is where we put our energy into the situation to bring about a healing as best as we know how. And we got what we're looking for. And I'm very happy about that. Now, if I work on Wolf, for example, to make sure that he has his nerve supply and circulation restored to an area where for 33 years that was blocked, okay, I would consider that a good work because this gets the arm back to where it'll function absolutely normally, which it is. Now, he says 95%. I would say that the muscle structures there, as they slowly change over, that'll take care of the extra 5%. Now, that's a good work. We're healing the physical body, yes. But the thing is the person involved will also have a feeling of internal elation, which will help the healing process on the mental body to be augmented or speeded up. It helps a person to have faith in the process. And anything which is going to increase a person's faith in the process is going to be uplifting for that individual. The process of learning to understand the thought, feeling, and spoken word. Because we are bombarded continually and have been brought up continually with the concept of seeing is believing, which is a scientific approach, and we actually deny the God-given ability that believing is seeing. We don't have confidence in that because we haven't used it, we're not used to it, we're used to observing what's going on out there without paying attention to what's going on in here. Now, granted, I think we all can agree that when we're dealing with the energies and letting it flow as a healer, we let it happen for the person's highest and best good and not be attached to outcomes. But then that would be equivalent to meditation without seed, where you're just experiencing what's going on with no consideration for outcomes. That's yin. Now let's go to the yang aspect. If we ever expect to learn how to control the destinies of energies pertaining to the mental body, emotional body, and physical body, then here is wherein we start taking individual responsibility for bringing forth good works, constructive action in all of these areas, which will be what we will judge, which is our responsibility. And this is the only way we can learn is by our own experience, where we begin to the best of our knowledge and the best of our teachings, bring about good, positive, constructive actions through the exertion of our own energies. Now this will take time. Now, theoretically, if we can take, for example, Reiki energy and then use that energy to direct for a higher purpose as determined by our own consciousness, then we will be able to direct that energy to enact a healing anywhere that we choose to enact a healing. And we will assume then the responsibility for that, even the karmic consequences of healing another person. You with me on this? Okay, we'll be dealing with the karmic consequences of being responsible for what we do, because oftentimes we may be taking on the karma of another individual. All right? Now, that's fair enough, isn't it? If we choose to do that, and we choose to face the consequences of that for what we would consider to be for a higher purpose, then perhaps that is valid. There is a law of sacrifice that we must learn to understand, where when you have pure love in your heart for another person, you willingly give up your life for them, to help them live a higher, more productive life. And so there is no greater love than this type of sacrifice, where you sacrifice your own energy to help another person live more productively. Now, this concept here of a, shall we say, of giving of yourself that another person may live, that may not be a true sacrifice, because we are able to replenish the energy that we utilized. But at the time, it is a giving of our energy that another person may be healed. And here's where a lot of healers get into trouble, because they do not take time to replenish the supply of their own energy that they give to help another person heal. So we have to have a balance there. So this is the development then of the yang energy, as I understand it, where we're involved in a constructive activity, and unless we take the responsibility for being involved in constructive activity, we never grow as a person. We become very, very yin, and we're kind of like a leaf blowing before the wind. We never assume direction for ourselves, which is responsible direction. And so there must be a balance between these two. And sometimes it's hard for us to determine, well, when do we take what we call constructive action, and what are the consequences of that constructive action? Or should we just sit back and just let things happen naturally, which is then being irresponsible to a degree by just letting the universe flow? I'm not going to call that irresponsible. I'll call it irresponsible if we do not take action where action will be appropriate or moved upon by spirit, to where we do things because we're moved upon to do it, which is beyond our consideration or judgment of what would be appropriate. And so we have to have a balance there as to, we pray to be used as a tool in the hands of the heavens, and we pray mightily until we're moved upon to do something, and we say, I don't want to do that. But then that is still going to be a constructive action, and we're the only one there that might be able to do that. And this is what I try to do in my life. I try to leave myself open to work on a wolf, or to work on Ken, or to do something to straighten out a spine or a back to help a person be freed of pain. And I think this is something that we should all consider carefully. We must consider these things carefully because of the ultimate consequences of our actions. It's not an easy, simple, yes or no, black and white solution. It's going to take a great deal of wisdom to be appropriate in the now with the energies that are directing us, or the times that we're directing ourselves through the, shall we say, by being responsible for the experiences that we know we have to do. And it's just a knowing that we have to do these things. Okay.
As I understand it, and I said yesterday, it's a total surrender to the situation. Our cells are actually electrical batteries, they're electrical generators. And we're parting with that electrical supply to the person that we're working on, and that is the drain. We're parting with our life force, as it were, in the cell, and that is the drain. We're actually flattening our batteries for a while. So we need to get together and recharge them.
Thank you, Peter.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Just wanted to offer a set of word patterns that I was taught by one of my teachers in connection with what John was saying. It's basically as we progress through the process of being the effect or feeling that way, we say, well, I go where I have to go, or where the effect of a situation. That was the first word pattern he taught me to become aware of. The next one was where we become causative. He said, I go where I choose to go, where I choose to go, where we become causative. And then he taught me to move beyond this, and what he taught me was, I go where God invites me.
Thank you, Kyle.
Okay, a number of things here. The principle of sacrifice, I think, is pretty central to this whole concept. And again, if you just go to Scripture, Jesus made the statement, something to the effect that those who would try to save their life will lose it, and those who would willingly lose their life will eventually enter into the kingdom. And I think this is a lot of what we're looking at here. If we go into these types of things with the concept that we don't want to deplete ourselves, that we're not willing to run ourselves down a little bit, that we're not willing to do something that will, say, have a little bit of a toll on us, and yet will be very uplifting to somebody else, then...
Do you hear this out in the kitchen? Repeat that, Doug, please.
Basically, you look at the concept that Jesus taught, those who will try to save their life will lose their life. And those who will willingly lose their life or willingly lay down their life for someone else are the ones that will enter into the kingdom. And to me, it seems like on the one hand here, we're in a position where sometimes we're going to very willingly do something that will uplift someone else, and it will take a toll on us. It will, on a physical level or on an energy level, it will run us down a little bit. And by my way of thinking, when we're unwilling to do that, when we're unwilling to get sapped a little bit ourselves, we're falling into that boat of trying to save our own life because we're not, we're not willing to lay ourselves down, even in a small way, for other people. And to me, the ultimate consequence of that is that we lose our life. I mean, we do run ourselves down by our refusal to run ourselves down. In other words, we get exactly what we've been resisting, which is being run down. So that's one thing to consider.
Let's take a look at our preferences here. Have you ever heard the old expression that blood is thicker than water and so on and so forth? Have you ever seen people who will do anything and everything for their own bloodline? You ever seen that? And they will do anything for anyone who is one of their relatives. But if a person is not one of their relatives, what do? No way. Because they're not related. And yet you find this among clans. You find this among different families, whereas you're accepted in the family as long as you're blood. And then everyone is obligated to fall behind and to help you in all circumstances. But one of the greatest meannesses, as taught by Sri Yukteswar, as also referred to by Buddha, one of the greatest meannesses that we have is our inability to shift gears in this area, where we cannot look upon another human being with the same degree of impartiality as we would our own bloodline. And so, for example, you have the law of adoption coming into play. You have a man that will adopt a child, but he will love only his own bloodline, but he can't love the adopted child. And there is a person who is so broken in his attitude that he cannot see beyond his own bloodline. And this is a very, very This is one of the meannesses, one of the 8 meannesses that will have to be overcome. Now, when you can take a child into your home, okay, that will be another bloodline, another race, mind you, and treat that child and raise that child as if it were your own, where you assume full responsibility for that child, at that time a person will begin to grow, and not until then, because they say, well, that child isn't mine. You see that in this today's society? You see it out there where people will say, I won't take care of that kid because that child isn't mine. And the child starves. You go to the Cook Islands and everyone has a home. And everyone has somebody who will take care of them because nobody has that blockage in the idea that every child is taken care of and loved equally as the children that come from the loins of that family. Are you with me on this? Okay, so as soon as we can look upon another human being in a family relationship or outside of the family relationship with the same degree of impartiality, and we look at the genuine brotherhood of men, we get out of our glitch, shall we say, and we start seeing an expanded view of mankind. So I just want to bring that out here because what Doug is saying is very, very true, especially if we apply it to practical applications here that sometimes grind us the wrong way and point out to ourselves our own inadequacies in expanding our consciousness to look at the human race as a whole. Continue on, Doug.
A statement that John has made in, I don't know, maybe book 1, somewhere in there, is that we have to, what's that? I have to ask John on that. Let's see, page. We have to, never mind. They asked me what page. Go ahead.
I just want to give you my little story of a sage. He lived on the mountain. A sage who lived on the mountain, and he was practicing his meditation up there. And down in the valley, there was a group of villagers down there. And this one woman, she went out one night. She wasn't married, and she had sex with this man, and she got pregnant. And so in the village, you know, it was really taboo if you weren't married to have a child out of wedlock. So she told her mother, she went home to her mother, and she says, Mom, you know, that sage on the mountain, he had sex with me, and this is his baby. And so all the villagers, you know, got really upset, you know, and they after she had the baby, they all went up to the top of the mountain, and they said to the sage, okay, this is your baby. You have to take care of it. And they just took the baby and they dropped it there in front of him. And he looked at them all and he says, so. Okay, so he started to raise the baby and took care of it and everything. And all the people were okay, except this one girl, you know, on her conscience, she just couldn't stand it anymore, you know. One day she just broke out in tears and told her mother, she goes, Mom, it wasn't the sage that did this to me, it was the baker down the road did it. And so all the villagers, they got upset. And they go, this isn't right. You have to take care of that baby, and the baker down the road has got to take care of that baby. Okay, both of you have to go back up to that mountain, get the baby, bring it down, and take care of it. So all the villagers go up to the sage and say to him, Give us back that child. He's not yours. It's their baby. So he was about 5 years old by this time. So the sage went, so. And he released them, of course.
How many of us have ever been in the off-soul position one way or the other? No resistance. Doug?
So a concept that John has taught is that we have to strike a balance between service and self-maintenance. You're way ahead of me there, Lewis, huh? Service and self-maintenance. There's a balance to be struck there. It's possible to get way out of whack in either direction. Some people will get so preoccupied with self-maintenance that they'll be completely unwilling to do anything that would put themselves out even one little bit for anyone else. And, of course, the result of that is they resist getting run down so much themselves that that's exactly what happens. And they get run down without performing any service whatsoever. They just get run down by their own resistance. You get the other extreme, however, of people that will always be there to help other people no matter what, and it becomes a very, very heavy compulsion where they have to serve, they have to help, they have to do everything for everyone else, and they don't take care of their own needs, and they get run down as well. So there's a balance there that has to be struck between these two extremes. John made another statement in there where he was saying that, you know, perhaps we might take it upon ourselves to help heal another person, and there would be some karmic consequences of our action. And that's very, very true. It's important to recognize that there's also karmic consequences of our lack of action. I mean, in other words, we're karmically responsible for what we do, but we're also very much karmically responsible for what we neglect to do when we had the opportunity to do it. So when you're there in a position where you're moved upon one way or another to do something that might be uplifting to another person, yeah, on the one hand you can say that there's consequences of doing that, but there's also some very obvious consequences of not doing it, you know, neglecting the opportunity to do it. And this is where John would, you know, get into what you'd call your sins of omission versus your sins of commission. In other words, you can create karma for yourself by what you do, which is a sin of commission, but you can also create it by what you neglect to do, which would be a sin of omission. So there's two different ways to look at this.
Some people need a good dose of spiritual cascara sagrada. Get them moving.
Okay, just one last thing on this. A few years back, I had the opportunity to get to know this one psychic surgeon from the Philippines, and had the opportunity to talk to him for quite a few hours. And one of the things that he shared with me is that in traveling around and working on people all over the world, he would go to the same areas, you know, over and over again, of course, and he would a lot of times be working on the same people 6 months or a year later. And one of the things that he mentioned, just kind of out of the blue, it wasn't even really in response to any question I asked, but he just kind of mentioned that in his observation, the sickest people that he worked on most of the time were hands-on healers, and he actually specifically said Reiki practitioners. But he said basically anybody that was doing a lot of hands-on work with people and was doing this on a continual basis, he said these tended to be the sickest and most run-down people that he came across. So just consider this, because, you know, yes, on the one hand you want to help other people, but on the other hand, if you totally run yourself into the ground, you're really not much help to anybody else anymore. So there's that balance.
Okay. Now I'd like to get into an area here, and I hope you're alert, and I hope your mind is keen, because you'll have to really stretch your thinking here to understand what I'm trying to put out here for you. In the world of intrigue that we're all a part, we are continually being exposed to different energies. And oftentimes, the very first thing that happens is we are attracted to an energy by people's interacting, communicating, giving light one to another, doing this, doing that, trying to get our attention one way or the other, trying to sell us something, what have you. Now, there's many different ways to get people's attention. This is one of the games of life that all of us are exposed to. You have many people who will try to get our attention by making us feel sorry for them. and they will have an illness or something that they will expose to us and try to recruit our help and trap us into helping them continually from that point on. You have people who have something new that they are making a profit from through sales, and they try to get our attention through advertising. And so the media is full of this type of advertising. They have a new gimmick that nobody else has, and of course, if this is something new, and everyone should have this new item because other people don't have it yet. And we get trapped into this particular area, and by our curiosity, which will be the first step, that'll get us trapped into the world of desire. Now, are you with me on the world of desire? One very spiritual lady shared an experience she had with me. And she shared this experience of such a nature where she was in this huge building. And in this building, in her dream, which was more like a vision than a dream because it's so vivid, she was taken throughout this entire building that seemed to stretch for miles. It was all under one cover. And it had every single type of physical thing that a person would ever want. And she went and took a look at all of the jewels that were available. She looked at all of the different types of artwork that was available. She looked at all the sporting equipment. She looked at all of the different clothing that was available, and everything with the very finest stitch and the very finest weave and the very finest embroidery and whatnot. She looked at all this sort of thing, and everything that her heart could ever desire was there. Now, this lady was a very, very spiritual lady. And in the dream, she suddenly realized that everything that she could ever want was there, which attracted her attention. And then she asked one person who was there, "How do you get out of this building?" And the person says, "Why would you want to get out of this building? You have every type of food you want. You have places to sleep. You have food, clothes to wear. You have entertainment. Everything you could possibly want is here. Why would you want to leave the building?" She says, "Well, because I find that there's no exit to this building." And the person says, "Well, you really can't get out of this building. I mean, you're here and you can't get out. And there's no exit. Now just enjoy, and you have everything here you could ever want of a material nature. Every book you'd want to read is here. Everything is here." And she began to study everything that was there, and she became unattached, what they call desirelessness. It's a duality where the desire is there, but no desire is there. She reached a point of desirelessness, and she went through the whole building, which took her quite a period of time, and she decided that she didn't want these things. And it wasn't that she didn't desire them, she had no desire for them. And the very moment that she reached a point at the very moment when she reached a point where she no longer had a desire for all of these things, she was outside the building. She was no longer trapped by where her attention was as determined by her desire. Now, if we understood this principle that I'm just presenting to you, the desire aspect, our desire for physical substance or physical things is what traps our attention into the physical world. And we must work diligently at coming to a point of being desirelessness. And when we reach that point, then it's all right to desire it, but we're not trapped by it, because it's just as good to not have it. And we don't have to have it, we don't have to not have it. It's a duality that we have encompassed at that point of time. Now, that desirelessness can be put into three major categories. Number one, love, where we want somebody to love, or we want somebody to love us. And we find ourselves getting trapped by this because we'll do anything if somebody will just love us. We want to be loved. And wanting to be loved is one of the greatest desires that attracts our attention and gets us really messed up with the relationships that we have, because we're struggling continually to be loved, and we have not learned just to love unconditionally and love without expectation or condition. We'll put it that way. And therefore, we always put conditions on our love, how we want to be loved a certain way, how we want to be desired a certain way, how we want to be the apple of somebody's eye. We want to be somebody special. We want to be set up above somebody else where they love us more than they love somebody else. And all these things get us into a mess in our relationship pattern, rather than loving without condition, without restriction, without expectation. It's loving unconditionally. Now, the second area that we'll get trapped up on is dealing with the sensory world. And in the sensory world, we're dealing with every single sensory thing that we enjoy. It's what we will call reality and certainty. It's something that we know exists. There's not something in the realm of delusion or the area of imagination or the area of dreams. This is something that exists within the world of reality, what we'll call reality and certainty. It is that which is truly in the area of creation, where it's not something we think has been created or imagine is being created. It's something that is. It's the truth of past, present, and future, and it is that which exists in the ever-present now. Okay, this is the reality and certainty that we must deal with. Now, here's where we have expectations and conditions which are placed upon how we want things to be in the way of our sensory life. We want things to smell nice, we want the forms to be a certain way, we want the colors to be a certain way. Everything has to be just right, or we will not be happy, or we will not feel loved, etc. We put conditions on our existence rather than looking at that as a desirelessness, rather than having to have them a certain way. And then we get into the area of the interchange. When I start concentrating, they land right on my nose over and over and over again. And little bugger, pardon me, I'm waving here. But my nose is like a great big antenna here, and when I'm really concentrating and thinking, over the years the flies land right here, and I'm very grateful for their presence.
We'll just set out the decoy.
Okay. Anyway, communication is another factor. And so you have the first one is your love, the second is reality and certainty, the third one will be basically communication. On how we communicate to other people, how we want them to communicate to us. And we put conditions and restrictions on how we receive communication. We put conditions and restrictions on how we give communication. And I won't talk to you unless you act this way. And I won't be nice to you unless you do this and this and this and this. Or I won't love you unless you treat me nicely, type of thing, you know. And we put restrictions on our communications. Now, this is in the realm of desire. Now, when we don't get what we desire, and we get trapped in wanting something, and we want it so bad that we keep putting resistance out to not having it, which then creates us not having it. So we did want something, but we're unwilling not to have it. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so the very thing that we desire, we have already created the death throes of that particular situation, where that which we desire, we have already destroyed by trying our darndest to have something which we're unwilling to not have. Now, this is really an important issue, because every time that we have a desire, every time in the physical universe of which we're a part, and we have a desire for love, we have a desire for sensory fulfillment, we have a desire for communication and so on. Whenever we have a desire, that means in our mind that we don't have it. And therefore our belief system is we don't have it. And so the very thing we don't have, we create not having, which destroys our acquiring eventually the very thing that we want. And we're into a situation where the thing that we want the most, we end up destroying the very thing that we want the most because we know that we don't have it. And by not having it in our mind, we make sure that we don't have it so that our desire will be continued. But all this is an unconscious thing. Now, if you take a good close look at it, you'll find out the thing that you want the most you can never get because you always mess it up so you can't have what you want. And that duality is established from the very moment that we desire something. You've got that? Do you see that? Now, when you understand that, you'll understand the traps we get ourselves into in relationships. We destroy the very relationship we want because by wanting it, we're admitting we don't have it, and therefore we believe we don't have it, therefore we destroy that unconsciously, that which we know we don't have that we want. Pardon me? It's on tape.
You want him to go slower. So by wanting him to go slower...
Okay, are you with me on this? Now, this is one of the most important things we can learn about desire. Because by the very fact that we desire something, we're acknowledging that we don't have it to begin with, and recognizing that we don't have it, we're creating not having it. So no matter how much we desire it, we always destroy the very thing that we want because we know that we don't have it, and so we're creating not having it. Now, I want you to think about that and put that into your computer. Now, after we go through the desire realm, then we start enforcing, and we start having to have it, and it becomes a compulsion, where this compulsion literally activates our entire life until we feel then, since we didn't obtain what we wanted, not knowing that we unconsciously have destroyed it, we then reach a point of inhibiting it where we can't have it. And this is where most people feel they are in their lifetime now. Well, I just can't have what I want. And it's a word pattern that we have gone through over eons of time of curiosity, desire, enforce, and inhibit, along with all of the reactive word patterns which control and dictate our lives because of the resistances that we have chosen to create by the desires that we initiated. And it all goes into the world of desire. Now please consider this. We go from desire to enforcing, where we have to have it, to where we inhibit it, where we can't have it. And these are the word patterns that we have, and these destroy us. Now, just because we go through the word patterns on it doesn't mean that we have eradicated that from our being, because we haven't excavated out the emotion connected with I can't have it, or I have to have it, or I want it. Now, you see this very, very thoroughly with little children. They want something very badly, and then they have to have it, and they do everything they can to get it, and then they fail, and then they can't have it, and then they don't want it, and they push it away from themselves. People are just more socially acceptable in doing this sort of a thing. Now, I've covered that. Doug?
I just wanted to go back to the level of desire and just look at it this way. When you say, I want something, whether it's wanting to be something or to do something or to have something, inherent within the word pattern itself is the acknowledgement that you don't have it. I mean, it's really that simple. If you say, I want X, every time you say that, every time you think that, what you're constantly affirming is that you don't have X. You know, I want whatever it is that you want. You're so busy wanting it that what you're really creating is the continual state of not having it, and it's inherent right within the word pattern itself.
With the desirelessness, that if we want something, we're bound to stuff it up and have the resistance and not get it. So where does the list come in if we put it on our list?
This will help you to interpret your list properly, because the only thing that you'll eventually have on your list will be those things that are concerned with constructive action, or the reduction of your karmic considerations that you become aware of.
Yes, this is the spiritual poverty that I was speaking of yesterday. Because if you say you don't have it, then you don't have the faith to go to your God presence, I am presence, whatever term you want to use, to manifest that in your life. And also you're not putting out the gratitude of others that do have what you have.
Nothing that exists in the physical universe exists without a desire behind it. That's very important to understand. You've been taught that anything that exists in outer manifestation has behind it thought, feeling, and spoken word, where that's the inner essence. The thought pattern, word pattern, and emotional pattern, that's the inner essence behind the outer manifestation. The act of creation itself is an act of will and desire. It's always an act of will and desire anytime anything's brought into creation. And this is true whether it's brought into creation consciously or whether it's brought into creation unconsciously. It's still always an act of will and desire. The trick in constructing your list, Anne, as much as anything, is to recognize that when you put something down on your list, you are expressing a desire. And where the person has to be very, very careful, where all of us have to be very careful, is in determining whether this desire is something that will ultimately be one that will lead to, shall we say, the completion of karma and the evolution of us as an individual, or whether that desire that we're putting forth is simply something that's going to trap us even further in enmeshment with matter. Confucius made the statement one time that as he grew older or as he grew wiser, he found that his desires no longer transgressed the norm, which basically meant he got to a point where all of his desires virtually had become were geared towards karmic completion and geared towards the highest and best good of all concerned, and he simply no longer had desires that were the type that would enmesh him in matter. That's the point that we want to get to ourselves. Of course, if we want to get to it, we're acknowledging that we're not.
That's exactly correct, Doug. And this is wherein, when we can be in the ever-present now, and we can let go of those desires that we have held in place by our resistances, immediately the human creation that we have created by our resistance goes directly back to the void. Because nothing is holding it there in a state of creativity, because we're no longer resisting not having it. Now this is such an important aspect, because it throws our whole list into a disarray, which Anne recognizes, because we begin to realize, well, are these desires that we have, is this for karmic completion, to unravel the big mess that we've made of ourselves over the centuries, or is this actually a constructive action? Now the danger here is the multiplicity of ideas that people have. And they must learn to be able to discern as to where to put their attention properly, that they might become successful in what they're doing. Because you have some people whose brains are splattered all over the universe, and they have 1,000 things that they want to do, and if they put it all down on their list, that 1,000 things that they have to do, that they want to do, would take a minimum of 500 years of constant activity. Now you stop and take a look at your list and put out an idea of how long it's going to take you to do something, and then double the time, and you'll probably be in the ballpark. You follow what I'm saying? And so on the list, be practical about this with your time. Be practical with the space that you have. Have you ever seen the old codger who's got about 600 years of unfinished woodwork up in the attic and down in the basement, and all these projects that they want to do, and then what he does, he goes out here and starts more? Or have you ever seen the farmer that is continually planting and planting new this and new that, realizing that he has to take care of all these things, even more so than what he's done before, and so therefore it's just a continual workload that's being multiplied upon him through his multiplicity of ideas. Here's where we have to be practical and narrow ourselves down to a very small, focused area, and do one thing at a time and do it well and say it is good, and then go on to the next project, rather than splattering ourselves with 150 different items, each of which is a year or two duration to do properly. I find myself in that boat, because I find myself with so many things that I want to do that when it comes to practicality, I don't have the time to do it, and I get bogged down. Now, therefore, what I have to do is I have to say no to about 90% of what I have on my list, and then bring myself down to something which is extremely practical. And I don't want to let go of some of these things I want to do. You ever feel that way? Oh, yes, we're attached to those things because it's going to be fun. It's a good game. I want to get involved in that. I don't want to let go of that thing. And that's the game we play. So we leave it on our list for maybe another year or two until we realize that that's impractical. So don't let your multiplicity of ideas, which in itself is a personological trait, get the best of you where you load yourself down with 500 items on your list, knowing that you can never complete that all realistically. I think the most I've ever had on my list is around 300 items. And I've got that pared down to right close to 100 now. And that's not workable yet for me because it's still bogging me down because of the projects that I have imposed upon myself. Now, this is where I want you to think this through very carefully and look at the desire that we get ourselves into for constructive activity, the desire for constructive actions. Any questions here? Okay.
I would just like to say that I have also had a quite big list, and what I've done, I've programmed myself to, before I go to bed, to have in a dream, have what I really wanted and just use it and play around with it, and then I just finish it off. It's like during the day, if I've really nothing to do, I just picture something that I really want to do and just visualize it and go in it and just do it and come back and I've done it.
I'd like to know the difference between desiring something and a knowingness that it will come into your life. When you've done the research on it.
When you desire something, and you continue to put the desire there and put your attention on it, it will manifest.
But there's another way of knowing what you want and then letting it go, not putting anything on it. It still comes.
Well, you have a reactive pattern, which is the resistance end of it. Okay? And on the resistance end, that which we desire, we resist not having it. And then that resistance goes into the unconscious mind, and then will create the very thing that we say we desire, and then that binds us, because it has a reactive notion, and we cannot free ourselves from that until we can eliminate all resistance. Now there's another form where you put your attention on it fully consciously, and the moment that you release your attention from that, it just goes to void, and there's no residual resistance there to hold it in our space. So we have to determine which one are we doing.
Well, I think it's from where I'm coming from, it's just a quiet knowingness that it will happen.
Then you're putting your attention on that?
Initially, when you're doing the research on it, and then you let it go.
But do you think of it again?
Maybe very passively, yeah.
Okay, like every morning and every night?
Not consciously, no. You're doing other things. Then.
Okay, here's where, if it's going to come into reality, you have to put your attention on it both consciously, morning and consciously at night, and keep the focus of attention there, that to keep it activated in the environment for it to come true.
And that's not desire.
Pardon?
That's not desire?
Sure, it's desire. What's wrong with desire? If there's something that you really feel is the thing that ought to be in your life, then you create that.
But earlier on we were saying that if you desire it, you won't, and if you feel you want it, you won't get it.
Because you have created the not having it as the source of your desire. If you can let it go, and where it's whatever is the position you take, then there's no resistance to the outcome.
Well, in my case, it's just a quiet knowingness that it will come.
Just look at Wolf's arm.
Yeah.
Just look at Wolf's arm. He desired, on the one hand, to have the arm healed, and yet on the other hand, he was perfectly willing for it to not heal. There was no attachment to it having to heal. So that's what John would call desireless desire. On the one hand, you desire to heal, but on the other hand, hey, it's okay if it doesn't happen. It's that simple.
Yeah, well, that would be my case too. Yeah. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But mainly it does happen if you don't desire it.
That's right. Okay, any comments here now? Dave? Oh, okay. Any comments or questions or what have you? Neil? Welcome, Somerset.
Yes, John, the situation with karmic completion, do you see that there's a certain momentum build up once the person gets beyond 50% of their karmic completion? And that
I didn't understand what you said, sir.
Karmic completion?
On karmic completion, yes, go ahead.
You see that a person builds up a certain momentum once they're past 50%, and is that what was it Laozi was talking about? You know, the situation where your desires are for leaving the earth rather than being attached.
I don't get the question.
Do you see that the ability to complete the karma becomes much more easy once a person's beyond the 50%? Like there's momentum build up, and so the attachment for the earth is the first 50% back towards the earth, and then you're moving away from that.
Yeah.
It becomes much easier as you go along.
Yeah.
You see there's a fulcrum point?
I don't see a fulcrum point.
No?
I don't see a fulcrum point in that.
Okay.
Because the lessons that we do not learn in our youth are still binding us as we age. And the resistances of our youth that we've never dealt with, that we cannot remember, then will bind us to that which we have resisted as we grow older. And yet, as we grow older, it appears that we are less resistant, when in reality we're more apathetic. Yeah. And then we die, because we haven't learned how to cope with the resistances of life. Then we have to take another little baby body and go at it again.
Okay, to recap desirelessness, let's say, for instance, I wanted a skull for my collection. And this is just, it could be a house, it could be a house, it could be anything at all. So I see myself with the skull, and I see it working there, and then I let it go and let it go to the void. But then in the morning, I wake up and passively see myself with it and without it, and then let it go. And then at night before I go to bed, again I see myself passively with it and without it and let it go. Is this the process that works? I'm just a little hazy on, we have a desire, and yet we have to let it go, and so it looks like I'm going to get my skull.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of get this mapped out, because we have our list and we have constructive desires, and yet desiring something, I guess to a point, brings the resistance that doesn't bring what we desire to us. So we miss what we, I guess I shall say, want, because a want is a desire. So the teeth, I got my skull. Okay, there it is. Wonderful.
That's your skull. Now have a hassle with Yassel.
Yassel. So am I correct in how I've sort of explained this, that you come along to a point and you go, oh, I think that this would be good for me to use in my life, and then you put it on your list, for instance, and then each morning and each evening you see yourself with it and without it, and you just continue, and whatever will happen, I guess that's about it.
That's right. Now that's your teaching tool. That's your skull.
I got my skull.
There's a blue box over here. Now that's a very special skull, and because you're going to be spending most of your time teaching up in Canada from here on out, that is the skull you can tell a few stories about. And I don't know of anybody who's earned it more than you have as far as injuries to skulls are concerned. Here, now you got to be careful of that. You got to fix that up a little bit.
I'll have to do a little work.
The sutures might be a little bit, but the thing is, this is a good skull. Now that's your skull.
Well, thank you very much, John. I very much appreciate it. I will tell many stories about this now.
Now remember, its name is Yassel.
Yassel. No hassles with Yassel. I thoroughly understand the desirelessness now. Thank you.
Have fun at customs. Remember, you're no relation to Jeffrey Dahmer if they ask.
Sign the inside of it or something. I don't know.
You see how well he could receive that? Isn't that beautiful?
Now this desire. If I desire $1 million...
Oh, what's that now?
If I desire $1 million...
You don't really believe what you're saying.
See, for you, Ian, that would be a desire that would just lead to more karma.
Right now, see, Ken knew that he was somehow, somewhere, going to have a skull that he could teach with. And he's got one now. Right, Ken? And that's manifestation, sir. Very good job.
What are you going to wish for, Elizabeth?
All morning I've had this wonderful, wonderful joy and enthusiasm within me because I've received about 4 blessings today already. And I in no way wanted to detract from Ken. I've been sitting there wanting to get up for a long time, but here I am. There's a long story behind everything, but I'll just keep it brief. I came to Gennezano knowing that I had a set amount of money and that I just trusted that it would pan out over the time. And yesterday, a dear friend gave me some money that I very much needed. And I'm just very grateful for that. Another friend presented me with another bottle of something I needed. I was very attached to receiving. Thank you.
Love you. Beautiful.
This is how I moved. I know that. Thank you. I wrote to my family, my mother and my sister, and I just totally let go of the idea that why don't they write to me? And today I received a beautiful letter from all of them. Last year I had a dispute with a very dear friend who owed me money, and I knew I had to somehow put that right for him, that he was given an opportunity to repay his debts. And we took exactly one date to the year, exactly, from one date of beginning to date of completion where we resolved a dispute. And to date I've received 5 letters from my friend. And I just feel so wonderful about that, because we can now go on with the most beautiful exchange of communion that I know we must have, unattached to relationship, just pure soul's greeting and meeting. And what's the other thing? The blessings just keep coming, and I just want to say that gratitude is really, really paramount for me. And every minute I'm just absolutely so full of joy and love, and I run around wanting to express it, and I just feel I've expressed it all now. So, thank you.
It's 11 now. Are we going to hold? We're not going to hold it for lunch, are we? I'll take a little break and then demonstrate the stuff. We're going to take about a 10-minute break here.